You know, some stories are so familiar, we just assume we know everything about them. But what if what we see on the surface is just the beginning? Today, we're going to dive deep into the story of the patriarch Jacob's arrival in Egypt. On the face of it, it's a simple family reunion, but hiding just under the surface of the text is a total masterclass in strategy, spirituality, and frankly, survival. So let's get into it. We're going to peel back the layers of this ancient story, and our guide is going to be the legendary medieval commentator, Rashi. You are about to see how a handful of verses can just explode with meaning once you know where to look. All right, so our story kicks off, but not with some big emotional reunion. No, it starts with a strategic calculation. As Jacob and his family are making their way to Egypt, he doesn't just wander in. He makes a very deliberate first move. He sends his son Judah on ahead. Now, on the surface, this just seems practical, right? I mean, of course you send someone ahead to get the lay of the land and figure out where you're going. It's just common sense. But the text uses a very, very specific Hebrew word here, and that's the word that caught Rashi's eye. That word is lorhat. Now, it can mean to point the way, sure, but its root is the same as the word for Torah, and its deeper meaning is really to teach. So, was Judah just an advanced scout, or was his mission something much, much deeper? And this is where Rashi just blows it wide open. He shows us two layers of meaning. The Peshat, that's the simple, practical sense, is that Judah went to get a physical settlement ready. But the Derash, the deeper dive, suggests Judah's real first task was to set up a house of study. Think about that. Before they even unpacked their bags, Jacob's #1 priority was to create a beachhead for their spiritual and cultural survival in a totally foreign land. Okay, so next, we finally get to the emotional climax we've been waiting for, the reunion of Jacob and his long-lost son Joseph after 22 long years apart. The text describes this incredibly powerful, tearful embrace. Or does it? So, Joseph, who's basically the second most powerful man on the planet, personally hitches up his own chariot and races to meet his dad. He falls on his father's neck and just weeps. I mean, this is decades of emotion pouring out. But Jacob's reaction? Well, it's different. And this is where we see the hidden spiritual drama playing out. Rashi points out something startling. The text never actually says Jacob weeps back. It never says he embraces Joseph. Rashi's explanation is just mind-blowing. He says at that exact moment of overwhelming emotion, Jacob was reciting the Shema, the core declaration of Jewish faith. For Jacob, seeing his son wasn't just personal, it was a moment of profound spiritual gratitude to God. It was a peak experience he dedicated entirely to the divine. So from this incredibly intense spiritual moment, the story just pivots completely to Joseph's brilliant political mind. He's got to protect his family, not just from the famine, but from getting totally absorbed into Egyptian culture. And his plan is so simple, so elegant, and it all hinges on one little cultural detail. Joseph basically gives his brothers a script for their big meeting with Pharaoh. He tells them exactly what to say. When he asks what you do, you tell him you're shepherds, and your fathers were shepherds before you. So what's the big deal? Why was this one instruction so important? Well, Rashi explains that shepherds were considered a tueva, an abomination to the Egyptians. Why? Because the Egyptians worshipped sheep as gods, and here were these guys tending them for a living. So by declaring themselves shepherds, the brothers would instantly become socially undesirable. This wasn't an insult, it was a masterful strategy. It guaranteed they'd be allowed to settle in the remote land of Goshen, far away from the capital where they could keep their own identity intact. Genius. Now here's another thing. Joseph doesn't bring all 11 of his brothers before Pharaoh. He very carefully picks just 5 of them. And the question, of course, is, which 5? And why only 5? What's so cool here is that Rashi shows us this is a living, breathing conversation. He actually presents a debate. One tradition says Joseph chose the physically weakest brothers. But no matter which tradition you follow, the goal was exactly the same, to show up looking completely non-threatening so that Pharaoh wouldn't look at them and think, great, new recruits for my army. It was another subtle layer of protection. Next up is one of the most remarkable moments in the entire Bible, the face-to-face meeting between Jacob, this nomadic patriarch, and Pharaoh, the ruler of the world's most powerful empire. Pharaoh asks a pretty standard question, how old are you? And Jacob's answer is just so heavy and so poignant. He says his 130 years have been few and hard. This is not small talk. This is the reflection of a man whose life has been filled with struggle, with loss, and with exile. He calls his life a sojourning, and Rashi immediately picks up on this word. All his days, Jacob felt like a sojourner, a stranger, an outsider. He never truly felt at home. And that feeling is just so central to the experience of his family, even when they're living in the wealthiest, most powerful nation on earth. So, the meeting wraps up with this really fascinating detail. The text says that when Jacob arrives and when he leaves, he blesses Pharaoh. Now, what does that actually mean? And look, the Torah mentions it twice. That's always a sign that we need to pay attention. Is this just, a polite hello and goodbye, or is something way more profound going on here? Once again, Rashi gives us two levels. The plain meaning, the Peshat, is that blessed here is just a formal greeting, like saying peace be with you. Totally standard court etiquette. But the deeper meaning, the Derash, well, that's a whole other story. Rashi explains that this blessing had a literal, miraculous effect. You have to remember, all of Egyptian civilization, its food, its wealth, everything, depended on the Nile River flooding its banks every year. Jacob's blessing, according to the tradition, was that from that day forward, the Nile would rise whenever Pharaoh himself simply walked up to it. The sojourner, the stranger in the land, blessed the king, and in doing so, secured the prosperity of the entire nation. Just incredible. So, as we've seen, this story that looks like a simple family reunion is actually this incredibly complex tapestry of spiritual devotion, clever political strategy, and straight-up divine power. Every little detail, from a single word choice to a repeated phrase, just opens up a whole new world of meaning. And that's really the magic of commentators like Rashi, isn't it? They keep these ancient stories alive. They show us that these aren't just dusty old texts. They're dynamic documents that can reveal new wisdom every single time we're willing to look closer. Beneath the surface, there is always more to discover. And that kind of leaves us with a final thought to chew on. If a 3,000-year-old story has so many layers of strategy and hidden meaning just waiting to be uncovered, what about the stories we tell about our own lives? What might we discover if we just took a moment to look a little bit deeper?